Here's something I bet we can all agree on. Passwords suck. But guess what? They are finally dying, and good effing riddance. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. As I'm sure you know, passwords are inherently flawed. They were invented in the 1960s when people were using dumb terminals to connect up to a mainframe, and you might have to remember one password to log in. Nowadays, we could have thousands of passwords that we're actually using. So the problem becomes that humans are really bad at passwords. We don't remember random strings of letters and numbers and things. So what we get is we get weak choices, right? You get like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is famous from Spaceballs.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the stupidest combination I ever heard in my life.
You reuse the same password over and over again. You might write them down or even put them on your computer in like a notepad or something like that. And so that just creates all sorts of vectors of attack. And even worse, these passwords are actually stored in databases on the receiving end of things. So if you have an Amazon account, Amazon is storing your password somewhere because of course you have to type it in and then it has to match that with your typed in password and it has to see if they're the same. Now, of course, most places these days do some sort of hashing or something like that where they're hiding what the actual password is. But of course, if you reuse a weak password from a site that doesn't do this encryption, then somebody can get that password from there and they can go on your Amazon account and they can actually access your Amazon account and start buying things, or your credit card account, or all sorts of other sorts of things. So obviously passwords are just terrible. And I've been saying for years that somebody needs to come up with a system to get rid of that. It turns out that passkeys are actually that system and they work really well with a couple of very important caveats. So before we discuss exactly what passkeys are in a little bit of detail, I'm not going to go into a super amount of detail, but it's actually not that difficult to understand. The advantages are they are incredibly secure because there is no way for a site, even if a site is breached like Amazon, if it has something like this. Actually, I'll take Microsoft or Apple because they already use passkeys. But let's say that there was a breach in the Apple database of our passkey accounts. It doesn't make any difference because without my key that's on my phone or my desktop or something, it doesn't really matter if the bad guys have access to that public key. So passkeys are significantly more secure. They're also much faster. It takes a couple of seconds versus let's say a minute or so, and that's assuming that you remember your password and you don't have to go find it or try a bunch of guesses or do the forgot password thing or something like that. So they're much more secure and much faster. There is also higher login success because there are fewer times that people are like, I can't remember my password. I have to submit a support ticket. I have to do all of that kind of stuff. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. And so that creates a better user experience and better user conversion. So we've been carrying around this broken system for decades that depends on humans to do things that humans just don't do, which is remember random numbers and strings of letters. So passkeys are a crucial upgrade, and they're the first thing that I've seen that I think actually might work. So what are passkeys? I'm going to start at a high level and then I'll drill down a little bit. Passkeys are kind of like passwords that your phone or computer remembers for you, but they're actually significantly better. With a password, as I said, the site you're logging into has to store a copy of your secret in its database, and that's why we see so many huge breaches because attackers can break in and steal those lists and then they have your password. With a passkey, your device creates a private key that never leaves your phone or your computer, and the website only gets the public key, which is useless to attackers on its own. So even if hackers do breach the site, there's no password or secret for them to steal because it's only half of what they need. For anyone who's paid attention to secure HTTP connections or HTTPS, you might be like, wait, I recognize this. And yes, you do, because this is inspired by the way that HTTPS uses. And that would be, I get on my web browser like Safari or Chrome or something, and I go to Bank of America to log in. And when I log into that connection, before I even type in my password or anything, there is a secure public-private key connection that is made between my computer, my web browser, and Bank of America, my bank. This creates that secure connection that you need. But in all honesty, passkeys are actually more secure than these web browser-based connections because they're using biometrics on your phone or your laptop. For instance, you could be using your fingerprint or your Face ID or something along those lines. That security is based on biometrics, and that is significantly more secure than the web browser connections that are being created on the fly. So passkeys are actually more secure than HTTPS connections, again with a really big caveat that I'll get to towards the end. So for those of us who want to geek out a little bit more, let's drill down a little bit. A passkey is a FIDO web authorization credential and it uses a public-private key pair. And FIDO, as I'm sure we all know, I had to look it up, is fast identity online. Of note, this is not a two-factor authentication system. In other words, it's not a system where you log into a service on your laptop and then it says, hey, go to your phone and, type something in, type in a secret code in your authorization software. So it's not two-factor authentication in that sense, but it is kind of two-factor authentication because one of the things that you have to do is input your biometric data and, your face or your fingerprint or whatnot. And so that sort of serves as two-factor authentication. So again, this is a public-private key pair. The public and private key are two gigantic prime numbers on the order of 512 bits or 1024 bits. They're very, very large prime numbers. You multiply those two things together. It's very easy to multiply large numbers together. It's incredibly difficult to factor them out. In other words, if you get the multiplication, if you get the result of this, you get this gigantic number and you're like, okay, I as the server can easily compare this because we can both multiply numbers out on our public and private key pairs and we can see if the results match. But if you're a bad guy and you steal half of the equation, it's very difficult. It would take about the age of the universe to factor out the prime keys. And so that means this is incredibly secure. And again, since half of this lives on your personal device, you could use a PIN, but most of these passkeys actually these days use biometrics. So the PIN would be a little less secure because someone, of course, could steal your PIN. They could easily get something like that. If it's just a 4-digit number or something, that breaks the whole system. But if you're using biometrics, those are very, very secure and they are stored on your device, each individual device. So in other words, if you log into Google or something, which does support passkeys, if you log in on your desktop, your laptop, and your phone and maybe your iPad or something, that's 4 different passkeys that are being generated. And of course, it's not reusing a password, so it's very, very secure. Each device has its own passkey to connect up to the Google server. So anybody who's actually used the old school safety deposit boxes at banks, you know that the bank keeps a key and you keep a key. And when you go into your safety deposit box, you and the bank manager both have to put in your keys and you have to turn them in order to open up the safety deposit box. That's analogously what is going on here. Your phone or your laptop or whatnot holds a vault key and the website only has the lock that allows you to open it with your own private key. So how does creating a passkey work? Well, the initial setup often requires a one-time password login, and that is the big caveat with all that. We will return to that in just a moment. But then after that, you just use your face or your fingerprint or potentially a PIN, although that's a much, much weaker system. You just use something local to your phone or desktop or laptop or whatever in order to log in. So passkeys kill most of the password pain for us users, but even more so, they're extremely secure. But the problem, the caveat to all of this is that these services use passwords down at the bottom of this in order for you to log in for the first time. And so the final nail in the password coffin will not occur until these services throw out using passwords at all and just do passkeys end to end from the setup to utilization. But returning to the process of creating this, when you do log in initially, there will be a create passkey button or something like that you then select, and the device then generates a key pair for you. It does it very, very rapidly. You'll just notice it for a second. So if you've ever seen that key pair thing, you should definitely say yes to that because it is significantly more secure than the way you've been logging in the past. So I highly recommend doing that. The first couple times I saw it, I was like, what is this thing? And so that's why I did the research and that's why I'm doing this video. So after passkeys are created, how do they work? Well, there's a challenge response flow that happens. So the site, let's say Google or Apple, sends a random challenge. Your device signs this challenge with their private key after you approve it, of course, using your biometrics or whatever. Then the server checks the signature to ensure that you are who you are by doing that multiplication of large prime numbers again. And then once it does that, it unlocks the service to you as if you had typed in your password. It's the same basic thing after that. It creates that secure connection. And recall that each of your devices gets its own passkey. So that's way, way, way safer than a password that, of course, number one, you're having to memorize. Number two, resides on the remote server. And number three is being reused across devices. If I sign into Chrome from 5 different devices, I'm retyping my password 5 different times. The passkeys, on the other hand, there's 5 totally different passkeys for each device, and that makes it way, way safer. So once again, this private key never leaves your device, not even when syncing, never. It's on the secure vault. And we can thank Apple for this. Several years ago, they created the secure vault on iPhones first, and then of course they expanded that out to iPads and to their desktops and laptops, and other phone and computer manufacturers have followed suit to create these secure vaults on all of these devices. And that's what really allows this to be extremely secure, because all of this information is stored on your device only, and it is never synced with anything else. So it's extremely secure. So let's talk security advantages and caveats. First of all, of course, the security boost. There is nothing for hackers to phish or breach because there's no database of passwords. And quite honestly, even if they called you, if they tried a phishing attack and said, hey, your boss needs your password or something like that, I couldn't even tell them because I have no idea what that giant number is. I don't know what my private key is at all. So there's no way that I could even tell them. And it wouldn't matter if they breached the database on the server end of things, because that's only half of the equation. It's much stronger than traditional two-factor authentication because passkeys replace the password and the second factor. They're kind of both of those combined, and they're much more secure. Of course, it's much more convenient. There's no more two-factor authentication or remembering passwords or typing those things in. It's got built-in multi-factor authentication, as I said, because the device possession plus your local unlock, your biometric unlock, are the two factors in one. Now, as for the caveats, there's really only one, and that is that you still need passwords to set this whole thing up. So that's the weak link in this chain. There are companies that are working to get rid of this, but nobody has completely yet. So when you're first logging in to use a passkey, you should probably create a very strong password, as that is indeed the weak link. Another more minor security issue is that device vault security really matters. Of course, if you lose your phone, then that's a problem. Hopefully you've got a reasonable password or PIN or something like that to log into your phone, so it's not easy for people to get into it. But if they could potentially breach things. And of course, if you lose your device, the recovery depends on backups or multiple devices or putting in your original password or things like that. So that's where the weakness of this system comes in. It's not 100% perfect. Also, very importantly, the adoption is still rolling out. Not every service supports it yet. However, a lot of the biggest players, including Google, Apple, and Microsoft, have indeed introduced this. And so that's a really good sign, and other people will probably follow suit relatively quickly. So to recap, passwords are broken. We all know that. Passkeys shift the security and remembering things and all of that to your devices, making logins both faster and much more secure. However, we are not there yet. These systems still have password fallbacks, which is a significant attack vector. So definitely use strong passwords when you're creating something with a passkey. And of course, all of this is still being rolled out as we speak. It's not all there yet, but if you see a company asking if you want to use a passkey, definitely say yes to that. So finally, this is the beginning of the end for passwords. Soon, remembering one more random phrase will feel as outdated as carrying around a pager, and thank God for that. Alrighty, folks, let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. Do you use passkeys yet or not? And if you do, did you know what they were prior to watching this video? Let me know in the comments. I actually had to do some research to find out all the details about this, and it's really, really cool. Anyway, while you're down there leaving the comment, if you don't mind liking, that really helps other people find this video. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.